Tell you about my great-great-grandfather, Wilford Elisha Cragun. And there's a particular story I'm going to tell you. But to preface it a little bit, his dad was Simeon, and they moved into this area in the 1850 time frame, and he was the first white child born up in this area. And because of that, he was given the honor to name the town. And so he said he looked around and he saw it was a pleasant view. Now some folks off to the south and east say it's because we're looking in that direction. But that's not the reason. He came from a place in Pleasant View, Indiana. And he'd heard his family talk about that. So a lot of folks think that that's maybe why he chose the name Pleasant View. And the story I'm going to tell you took place when he was 27 years old. And when I tell you the story, and I think about a lot of our 27 years old folks, and then I hear this story and I think, man, I've come up really kind of short, because the people back then worked, and they worked hard. He died when he was 43 years old. He was a father of 11 children, and this story takes place because of water. Now, he had the ability to find water and develop it. And they used to do what they called a drain, but they would find a place where there was a lot of water. And in Pleasant View, he developed Alder Creek over here. He developed Little Missouri and put in a lot of the original drains. And what they would do is find where there was water, and then they would get a team of horses and they would drag it out, and they would go as deep as they could with the horse, and then they would start digging down to the source. And when they weren't farming, they'd be digging. And this took place in mid-January of 1880. And they were digging what they called the drain, but that was the way to get the water out. And they would put in what they called culverts. Nowadays, a culvert is a piece of galvanized corrugated metal pipe or concrete pipe. But back then, you'd get down to the grade you wanted, and then you would line the sides with great big rocks, and then lay a big piece of slate bridging those rocks, cover it with some straw, and then the water would come out. And they'd gotten to a point where they said they had what they called quicksand. Now what that was at that time is there was enough water coming in, and with the loamy soil left over from Lake Bonneville, it got kind of mushy, so they waited until it got frozen, and he went in and was digging this out to get it deep enough and continue on. And what they would do is they would set the stones up here and put the slate on, and they'd dig down here and throw the dirt back to cover it up, so they didn't have as much dirt to move. And they got to the point where they were just about done, and the guys that were standing up there saw these two frozen banks start to come in. And he had just barely enough time to move, and other people got out of the way, and the banks came together. And on some accounts it said it would have killed him had the banks not come together and stopped, because they were frozen, and that kept the dirt from falling in, because at that point he was 20 feet deep. Now they didn't have OSHA back then, and we didn't have shored up trenches, and so it was the natural slope that they'd hoped would hold it with the frozen dirt. And there was a man named Shackelford who was there, and on every account of this I've heard, they made a point to say he was never known to hurry or run. And so he walked half a mile down to my great-great-grandma, who was in bed after having given birth 2 days before to my great-grandpa Mormon. And he said, and I'll quote it, he said, "It's all up with Wilford. He's buried in the drain." And so she got out of bed, threw on her clothes, hurried down to get her father-in-law, and he got Brother Jensen, and they went running back up, riding their horses up to try and get great-great-grandpa out of the ground. And the man who'd stayed there to help was digging with his hands as fast as he could, and they said his hands were just bloody, trying to move that frozen earth out, and they could hear the muffled cry from underneath, just hurry. And so they got him out, and they took him down the hill to the doctor. And they went in, and the doctor in Ogden looked at him, and he said, Wilford will never dig another ditch, and he'll never have another child. And later on, he went on to say, but I got better, and I dug as many ditches, and I had that many more children, as he had 11. And it's an important thing to note, because the pictures I looked up and saw, his dad Simeon had 5 boys, all started with the name W. And the rock house that sits down on Pleasant View Drive, when you see the picture of that, there is not a tree. There's not even anything like a sagebrush. Barely you could maybe make out any grass. And that's what Pleasant View was like without water. And he dug those trenches and developed those water sources that we now have and enjoy. And when I think he did all that, because when he got buried, it was mid-January of 1880, and he was 27 years old. And he passed away when he was 43. And in that time, he got called on a mission out to West Warren, because the saints out there were having some arguments and difficulties. And he was able to bring them together. And then he was called to go on a mission to Indiana, where some people who didn't like the missionaries went and poisoned him, and he was able to get home on a train, and he died a year after, or a month after he got home. But that was the kind of life he lived and the kind of thing he did in that short amount of time. And I thought, as we were leaving today, I went, do I have everything I need? Oh, I don't have my phone, so I can check scores on sports and see all the people that are trying to get a hold of me because I'm so important. And think about the time when you'd leave in the morning and your wife would know the general area you were at, and then you'd show up in the evening, and maybe you'd have somebody come and give you lunch. How am I doing, Jolene? Okay, that's 7 minutes. So what I will say now, as I read these stories, and as you read the story in front of it, and you read the story behind it, and then you read the stories of the people that were there were a lot of things I would have liked to have asked him, because everything they got in Pleasant View. And I wanted to ask, where did you get big pieces of slate to go and lay over those trenches? Because those trenches are still the ones that didn't get tore up. For example, when they put in the Evergreen subdivision, I remember hearing people who were excavators and who got down deep, and they said, I got down this deep, 18 feet, and there was a man-made thing with water running in it, clear and clean, and it was still going. And I wish there was a little bit more I would know. I've had all these questions. I'd love to ask him, did you ever use dynamite? Where was this trench that you got? Where was this drain that you got buried in? And so you might think that you have boring lives that nobody wants to know anything about. They would never care to hear about your exploits with the carburetor that you overcame and whatever started up. But it won't be boring in 150 years. And so with that story, I would maybe leave you with the idea, go ahead and write your stories down. There's a place down in Ogden that, regardless of your interest or persuasion, will help you at no charge go and make a record of your story and record it so that other people in 150 years will be able to read your stories, and you'll touch those lives of your great-great-grandchildren the way his stories touched mine. Thank you.